Hi, it's typeonecat, and today I'll be talking about something a little bit heavier, which is depression and eating disorders living with type 1 diabetes. And as I said in my intro video, of course, some of these heavier things you may not want to watch, so if it's not for you, then definitely feel free to skip through. But let's dive in. When I was first diagnosed, I definitely did not understand how diabetes was going to affect my life. And of course, getting used to taking shots and checking my blood sugars all the time was a little difficult, but the difficulty of living with diabetes was so much more than the bruises from the manual finger sticks and the shots and the shots stinging and also giving me bruises. Diabetes radically changed my relationship to food, and I think that was probably the hardest part. We were pretty strict with my diet. My mom was super into research, and we went to the library and studied a bunch. At the time, low-fat diets were considered the most healthy, and so we ate fairly low-fat, had some vegetarian meals occasionally, but it was fairly healthy, but still pretty high in carbohydrate, a lot of grains and fruit as well. And I did not want to gain weight, especially as I got into my teen years. Was very self-conscious about gaining weight and tried my best not to by restricting my food. And my doctor was pretty worried about that, so sent me to a dietitian. I don't recall her having a lot of experience with children with type 1 diabetes, or maybe even with diabetes at all. But their priority was for me to gain weight, and my blood sugars could suffer. That was fine. They told me that I could eat whatever I wanted, and I went from mildly anorexic to a full 180 and suffered from binge eating, pretty severe binge eating. I never purged, but definitely binged and was out of control with that for, I would say over 10 years. I tried to do damage control as much as I could by, not eating a ton of sugar or carbohydrate, but I did for sure. And I would eat like couple pints of ice cream, a gallon of ice cream, like half a loaf of bread, half a box of Cheerios, a whole jar of peanut butter, a whole couple of blocks of cheese. Like, I would go into this trance almost like state, and by the time I came out of it and I was done eating, I felt sick, but like I said, I never threw up, but I felt sick and I didn't know how to bolus for what I had just eaten. I just didn't know how much I ate. I couldn't figure it out. So of course it affected my blood sugars a lot. And part of my depression, I think, stemmed from, of course, being diagnosed with diabetes, but part of it also was seeing how it affected my family, my parents, and I did ask for their permission to share some of this information with you, and I'm so thankful that they said yes, because it is a part of their story as well. but they fought a lot about my blood sugars and my diet, and what to keep in the house, and I felt like a burden. I felt like diabetes was tearing my family apart, and that was really pretty heavy and sad for a kid. And I started to rebel again when I started binging. I would hide my blood sugar meter and my logbook because I didn't want my parents to see my blood sugars. And I wish that I've seen this a lot in families where the female caregiver is usually a little bit more strict and male caregivers are a little bit more laissez-faire, kind of let kids be kids, kind of an attitude. And so we did change my diet, but there were still a lot of foods around the house, chips and ice cream and candy, that were, like, you're not supposed to eat that, but, we didn't get rid of it in the house and other people could eat it. So I would go to the kitchen in the middle of the night and just binge and hide it, and I felt so much shame. And I know that it would have been hard for my whole family to change, and I would have felt probably even guilty about that too. But I think it would have been hard, but it wouldn't have been quite as hard as what we all went through. So I was super depressed, out of control with my blood sugars and eating. And that continued from my mid-teens to, and I did gain weight, so the doctors were happy. My blood sugars were not amazing, of course. I left home at 20, and I was interning at a dialysis center at the time, and my depression worsened. I didn't feel like I could get in control of my diet, and I knew that it was destroying me, and I saw what those effects were. I knew that young people could end up on dialysis or with diabetes complications, and I was scared, but I didn't know what to do. And I started working with the adult endocrinologist once I graduated, and working with my patients, and that really changed a lot because I didn't feel like I could ask them to do things that I couldn't do myself in changing their diet and lifestyle. And they also gave me purpose. Like, I didn't want to live. I was self-injuring, cutting myself, feeling really overwhelmed. I was having panic attacks. My baseline was sad. I was a well of sadness. And anytime I stopped, and I was so stressed out during undergrad, I would wake up and cry. I'd be on the bus and cry. I would go to sleep crying. Like, anytime I had a moment of stillness, I was just so sad. And I refused to go to therapy because I had gone to therapy before, and I just, had some negative experiences. But working with patients with diabetes and feeling like I had to be able to do what I was asking them to do gave me the motivation to make a lot of changes. And they helped me want to live. Like, I felt like I was making a difference in their lives, and so maybe I can continue to live. If I could make a difference with my story and with my pain, then my life was worth something. And so at home, I was living by myself. I made changes to my food environment so I wasn't having to fight it if I was tired or stressed. I got rid of the junk foods and things that I would binge on, even if it kind of seemingly should have been an okay food. If it was a problem food for me, I just wouldn't have it in the house. And, you know, if I wanted to treat, sometimes I would get single servings or, it would always be outside of my house. And I also started to take antidepressants. I was on an SSRI and another antidepressant for almost 7 years. And I think that taking ownership of my food environment, my diet, and finally getting my blood sugars under control really helped with that. Because, you know, I saw at a very young age the damaging effects of my uncontrolled blood sugars. I was diagnosed with retinopathy in my mid-20s. It has since, you know, healed, and they can't find any evidence of diabetes damage to my eyes. I also had some kidney damage in my early years, and that's totally fine now as well. But yeah, so I was on antidepressants for 7 years, and you know, I don't remember where I met her, but there was an older lady who had type 1 that I met somewhere, and she had run a marathon or run marathons, and I was like, oh wow, that's cool. I didn't know like people with diabetes could do that. And then one of my friends, I always considered her my work sister. She asked me one day, she was like, hey, do you want to like run a marathon with me? And I was just like, can you just do that? Can you just like decide to run a marathon? But we did. We started to train. We were already running maybe like once a week, like 3 miles, 4 miles with other coworkers. But I wasn't a runner. Like I never ran. I was like hiking a little bit. But we signed up for a marathon clinic and started to increase our mileage to the point where, like, of course we were running 10 miles, 13 miles a couple times a week, and it was great. And I don't run marathons anymore because of an injury, and I can talk about that later in another video, but it was just, I was so proud of myself. I didn't think that I could do something like that, and it was really exciting, and we ran our first marathon together. So many miles, so many miles training, but it was a lot of fun. It was a great time. And so I think around this time, I got a CGM and I got my insulin pump, the Omnipod, and that was really great for my diabetes care, so I didn't have to take a bunch of shots and a bunch of finger tests all the time. And I also learned about some of the reasons why people with diabetes have trouble with appetite regulation. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease, right? And the body attacks the beta cells in the pancreas. And there are a few hormones that we have that are essential for life. So without them, we will die. Insulin is one of them. That is why people with type 1 diabetes have to take exogenous insulin. But I found out later that the pancreas, the beta cells also produce another hormone called amylin. And in people with type 1 diabetes, if the beta cells are destroyed, we're also not producing amylin. And what amylin does is it helps with insulin sensitivity. It helps with appetite regulation, satiation, as well as gastric emptying. And so some of these things that I felt like were my fault with my appetite regulation, why was I so out of control? Like physiologically, we have the cards stacked against us. And of course, with like blood sugar swings, when my blood sugars weren't under good control, the highs and lows also make you hungrier. And like low blood sugars feel super terrible, especially on high amounts of insulin and high carb diets, because they're just like the crashes are so extreme. And I felt like eating absolutely everything in sight when my blood sugar would go low. And definitely now I recommend, and of course I don't always treat my lows with just glucose tabs or a little bit of juice, but it can be a habit where you go into like a full-on like snacking session and then like totally overcorrect a hypo or a low, and so treating it with really boring stuff until you feel better and then decide if you're gonna have like a full snack or meal is definitely can be helpful. So got into running marathons. I was outdoors a lot, of course, training out in the sun, getting a lot more vitamin D. I also started supplementing with magnesium and fish oil, like lowering inflammation, started to incorporate a low inflammation, low carbohydrate diet, and I suddenly felt like I didn't need the antidepressants anymore. It was really weird. Like I had more energy, like I wasn't tired all the time, and didn't need tons and tons of caffeine to function. And so I, tapered off of the antidepressants that were starting to make me feel like numb instead of normal. And, under the supervision of my psychiatrist. And yeah, I mean, I definitely still feel sad a lot of times, but it's situational now. It's not my baseline, and that's an incredible feeling, to be baseline okay, be baseline pretty happy, and I don't, hurt myself anymore. And I don't binge anymore. I have a much, much healthier relationship to food. And of course, diabetes makes anyone's relationship to food complicated. We're looking at numbers all the time, weighing and measuring things. Of course, now, like I said, on a lower carb diet, I don't really weigh and measure things anymore because exact calculations aren't super necessary to prevent lows or to keep my blood sugars in range. And that's like one of the ways that I've been able to relax in this disease. But yeah, I was in a very, very dark and bad place, out of control, for a long, long time. So if you don't feel okay, I understand how that feels. If you feel alone, I understand how that feels. But there is hope. And I know that in relationships, food, especially in Hawaii, food is love, and it can be hard to ask other people to change things or do things for you. But the people who should be in my life and who care and understand will do that for me. It has not always been conflict-free. It has not always been easy, and it has definitely made some relationships challenging. But there is hope. There is a way out of the dark places if you are there. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.